The winter wind howled through the empty streets, biting at David Carter's exposed skin as he pedaled his battered bicycle through the pre-dawn darkness. The rusty chain squeaked in protest with every rotation, a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. His breath came in visible puffs, mingling with the frosty air as he navigated the sleeping city. This was his life, a relentless cycle of toil that began each day at 3:30 a.m., when the world was still wrapped in silence. First job, milk delivery, 4 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. David's frozen fingers clutched the handlebars as he made his rounds, delivering glass bottles of milk to doorsteps in the affluent neighborhoods. He knew each house by heart, the Johnsons with their perfectly manicured lawn, the Wilsons who always left their porch light on for him. As he placed each bottle carefully on the stoop, he tried not to think about how these people slept in warm beds while his own children, Emily and Jacob, huddled together under thin blankets in their cramped apartment. Second job, diner shift, 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, David was already behind the counter at Pete's Diner, his second job of the day. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air as he poured cup after cup for bleary-eyed commuters. "Morning, Dave," chirped Lisa, the regular who always took her coffee with 2 sugars. "Good morning, ma'am," David replied automatically, his voice rough from lack of sleep. His feet ached, his back protested, but he kept moving, because stopping wasn't an option. Not when Jacob needed his asthma medication. Not when Emily's school tuition was due. Third job, construction, 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. The construction site was David's personal hell, a sun-baked expanse of concrete and steel where he hauled bricks until his hands bled. His coworkers called him Machine, because he never took breaks, never complained. "Hey Carter, slow down! You're making the rest of us look bad," joked Carlos, one of the foremen. David just wiped the sweat from his brow and kept working. Each brick he lifted represented another dollar toward keeping the electricity on, another step away from the eviction notice threatening their apartment. Fourth job, street vendor, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. As evening fell, David transformed into a street vendor, selling handmade wooden toys he carved during his rare moments of rest. The flickering street lamp cast long shadows as he arranged his wares on a rickety fold-out table. "Pretty work," remarked an elderly man examining a carved train. "You make these yourself?" "Yes, sir," David replied, his fingers tracing the grooves in the wood, grooves worn smooth by his own hands. Fifth job, janitorial work, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. The gym was deserted when David arrived for his final shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he pushed his mop across the tile floor, his body moving on autopilot. His reflection in the mirrored walls showed a man aged beyond his years. Deep lines etched around his eyes, shoulders permanently stooped from exhaustion. It was here, in the quiet solitude of the empty gym, that David allowed himself one moment of weakness. He leaned against the mop handle, his breath coming in ragged gasps as tears threatened to fall. The numbers never added up. No matter how many jobs he worked, how many hours he sacrificed, it was never enough. The breaking point. One particularly brutal night, as freezing rain lashed against the windows of their tiny apartment, Jacob's breathing grew labored. David watched in horror as his son's lips turned blue, the asthma attack worsening by the second. "We need to get him to the hospital," his wife Sarah cried, her voice cracking with panic. But the medical bills from last time still haunted them. David's hands shook as he counted their meager savings. $47.28. Not enough. Never enough. With trembling fingers, he called Mr. Kowalski, the pawn shop owner. "I'm coming in," David said hoarsely. "I have something to sell." The family heirloom pocket watch, the only thing of value his father had left him, bought them one more month of breathing room. The turning point. Weeks later, as David served coffee to his regular customers, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive overcoat sat at the counter. "You're here every morning," the man observed, studying David with curious intensity. "Yes, sir. 6 days a week," David replied, pouring the coffee with steady hands despite his exhaustion. The man, who introduced himself as Richard Holloway, CEO of Holloway Logistics, left an unusually large tip that day. And the next. And the next. Then came the life-changing question. How would you like a job that pays 3 times what you're making now? The ascent. David's first day at Holloway Logistics was terrifying. Surrounded by educated professionals in a gleaming office building, he felt like an imposter. But Richard saw something in him, the same relentless drive that had kept David alive through years of struggle. While others went home at 5 p.m., David stayed late, learning everything he could. He studied logistics manuals by flashlight during his lunch breaks. He practiced typing on a discarded keyboard in his tiny apartment. 5 years later, the man who once delivered milk before dawn now sat in a corner office. Emily was in college, the first Carter to ever attend. Jacob's asthma was under control with proper medication. And that pawn pocket watch? Richard had quietly bought it back and returned it to David on his promotion day. The reward. At Emily's graduation ceremony, as she crossed the stage to accept her diploma, she paused mid-step. To the confusion of the audience, she walked back to where David sat in the stands, and pulled him onto the stage with her. This, she announced to the crowd, her voice strong and clear, is the man who made this moment possible. My father, David Carter, the strongest person I know. As the applause thundered around them, David finally allowed himself to cry, not tears of pain or exhaustion, but of overwhelming pride and joy. Epilogue. Today, David Carter's story is told to new employees at Holloway Logistics as an example of perseverance. His old bicycle sits in his spacious garage, a reminder of how far he's come. And every morning, when he drinks his coffee in a warm kitchen surrounded by his family, he remembers the unbreakable will that brought him here. Because success isn't about where you start, it's about how far you're willing to go for the people you love.